The biggest disappointment at CES this year for me was the lack of any announcements regarding Intel Arc's next-generation GPUs, codenamed Battle Mage. In an interview with PC World, we did get a few hints at what's coming, and we'll take a look at those in detail. Intel also showed Lunar Lake, which looks intriguing, but it's Arrow Lake that might give Intel the DIY PC crown back later this year. Today's video is sponsored by urcdkeys.com. If you want to activate your Windows, you can pay Microsoft $100 or more for a Windows 10 Pro key, or you can get one from an OEM seller like URCD Keys, who have partnered with Cortex for a discount on what is already a really low price, for a total of just $15 when you use my code. The keys work globally, and you can even use them to upgrade to Windows 11. After you've made your purchase, you will find your key in your purchased orders on the URCD Keys website. Click on Get Keys and copy the key. Then in Windows, click on Start and type Activate, and then click Activation Settings. Then click Change Product Key, paste your key you just purchased, and click Next. That's it. Windows is activated. If you want Office 2021 Professional, you can use the same C25 code and get it for just under $84. URCD Keys has a New Year's super sale going on right now, so you can get even more savings until the 31st of January. A huge thanks to URCD Keys for sponsoring today's video. Check the links in the description to get your cheap OEM Windows key today. As far as new processors announced by Intel for upcoming launches, laptop buyers have a bunch of interesting options, from the 14450HX in the mid-range all the way up to the monster 14900HX with 24 cores and 32 threads. Intel projects an increase of 17% in gaming compared to last gen, and a massive 51% improvement in multi-threaded tasks, which is a bold claim. So you can expect to see these in this year's high-end laptops like the Razer Blade 16. Thing is, these are Raptor Lake refresh chips, not the latest Meteor Lake launched last month. It's kind of awkward that Intel would make a big deal out of Meteor Lake with new branding and all, and then a month later launch a refresh of the previous generation, still on Intel 7, which is slightly worse than TSMC's regular 7nm that went into production in 2018. That malign 10nm node process from Intel just won't go away. I mean, at the end of the day, what matters is performance, and when it comes to laptops, no one does integration better than Intel. There's a reason why OEMs still go with Intel when it comes to volume and reliability for high-end models. So in practical terms, the co-design that Intel does with OEMs probably offsets the technology lagging behind their competitors like AMD. The new Meteor Lake chips are relegated to 15 and 45 watt products with up to 10 cores and 12 threads, where the P cores can go up to 5.4 GHz. The good news here is that all the work that Intel did for Arc Alchemist has translated into Meteor Lake's integrated graphics, so low-power laptops based on these chips should actually be pretty decent for gaming. It also means that stuff like XeSS will work on Meteor Lake out of the box. So basically, Intel is starting to catch up with AMD when it comes to their integrated graphics being a scaled-down version of their discrete graphics stack, and all the positive synergies that come from that. It's just a shame that Meteor Lake doesn't scale up to higher wattages, higher than 45 watts that is. One of the coolest devices to rock Meteor Lake is the ZenBook Duo with two OLED touchscreens featuring the Ultra 9 185H at 45 watts. With a thin form factor and dual OLEDs, it's impressive that Intel can keep a 16-core laptop like this cool, even if only 6 of the cores are P cores. This is one of the few laptops I'm actually interested in, especially as the biggest surprise here is that this device starts at just $1,500. That's for the Core Ultra 7 version, but still, that's a really competitive price for a product like this. The Arc GPU also supports HDMI 2.1, so you can hook this up to a 4K 120Hz OLED, for instance. Another really interesting device that will use Meteor Lake is the 1X Player X1, which by the way should have more ones and more X's in the name for sure, which merges the idea of a tablet, a laptop, and a handheld gaming PC into one. Note Note that Meteor Lake doesn't support Thunderbolt 5, so to get around that, this device uses Oculink for a 64 gigabits per second transfer speed, which means you can connect an external GPU to the device and it won't get choked on bandwidth. Even without the external GPU, this device performs really well at 28 watts. YouTube channel ETA Prime tested a version with the Core Ultra 5 135H, so that's the 14-core variant with 8 GPU cores, and it ran Forza 5 at 1200p, so the screen's native resolution at 100 FPS average, with a mix of medium and low settings. Remember, this is the i5 equivalent of Meteor Lake, so that's really impressive stock performance. This device can triple as a portable console, a tablet, and a laptop/desktop PC, like I said, and the i5 variant, or Ultra 5, is $860 on Indiegogo right now, so that's not a bad price for a device that's this flexible. Note that there's also a bundle with an external GPU included for $1,500. Keep that in mind as we'll come back to that in a second. Another thing that's cool about Meteor Lake is that the disaggregated strategy that I've talked about in the past that Intel is pursuing has now materialized. So for instance, the media engine for Meteor Lake is disaggregated from the graphics, so the SoC can keep the GPU turned off while running video playback. Instead of calling these elements chiplets, Intel is calling them tiles, but the principle is the same. This sort of design philosophy is what I'm expecting to see in their next-gen GPUs, codenamed Battle Mage. So basically a bunch of disaggregated parts that can scale up or down, depending on the segment. The rumors out there suggest that Battle Mage will be focusing on the mid-range only, but I think that won't necessarily be the case. If Intel can build Battle Mage in the same fashion they built Meteor Lake, it's certainly possible that they can scale a mid-range Battle Mage GPU up to a high-end one. I don't think it's a question of if, I think it's a question of when. According to Intel's Tom Peterson, 30% of Intel engineers are currently working on Battle Mage, mostly on the software side. What that indicates to me is that they are working to get a tile-based GPU working as intended. The silicon is ready, so it's just a matter of getting the software side of the equation ready. I think by summertime or a bit later, Intel might surprise everyone with a working tile-based GPU that could relegate AMD to third place in the market. I know that sounds optimistic, especially as it's Intel we're talking about, who haven't had a great track record recently when it comes to delivering on their promises, but given the direction that AMD went with their 7900s as far as chiplets are concerned, and their decreased interest in the DGPU market, I wouldn't be surprised if Intel leaped ahead of them if Battle Mage is indeed tile-based. I mean, it all comes down to this: neither AMD nor Intel can compete with Nvidia when it comes to building a high-end monolithic GPU, so it comes down to whom out of Intel and AMD gets a proper chiplets-based GPU working, as in a GPU that can have multiple core chiplets and not just one core chiplet and memory chiplets alongside that, as we see with RDNA 3. And I think Intel got there with Battle Mage, and it's doubtful that AMD will do the same with RDNA 4. By the way, on a side note, one angle that could see AMD get some sales is putting some enormous amounts of VRAM on their next-gen GPUs just to get some sales off of the AI craze. But as far as gamers are concerned, Radeon should take Intel's threat seriously. One positive byproduct of this effort by the graphics division is that now Intel has entered the emerging PC handheld business. The new MSI Claw runs off the Meteor Lake-based Core Ultra 7 stock configuration, so it's not a custom design specifically made for this form factor. It's the same Ultra 7 chip that goes into laptops. Now, if you recall, like I said earlier, the fact that the 1X Player X1 can be bought in a bundle with an external GPU means that potentially Intel can have a bunch of external GPUs based on Battle Mage come out later this year, with Thunderbolt 5 eventually being added to Intel's lineup, and with PCIe connectors like Oculink. A lot of PC users might not need a PC tower anymore. Buy one of these tablet/laptop devices or a portable handheld PC thing and keep adding stuff over time as needed, like the eGPU and a larger monitor. When you're done playing a first-person shooter on your desktop monitor in your gaming room, you can take the client device with you to the living room and plug it to your TV to watch a movie. So rather than having a bunch of different devices, you can aggregate all your work and entertainment needs in one device that's more modular. Now, the last thing worth mentioning are the client chips coming later this year. So that's Arrow Lake and Lunar Lake. Arrow Lake will be the new microarchitecture for high-end desktop desktop PCs, and Lunar Lake will be the low-power mobile chips. To boost confidence from consumers and investors, Intel showed a Lunar Lake chip at CES and said these are already shipping to partners. We can see on-package DRAM with 2 LPDDR modules, probably Samsung 5X at 8,533 megatransfers. This configuration is similar to what Apple has been doing with the M series. These LP5X modules have a 16GB capacity, so with 2 you're looking at 32 gigs of on-package DRAM. While it's possible to combine on-package memory with off-package memory, I think the target devices for Lunar Lake probably won't be featuring expansion support, so devices with Arrow Lake will be limited to 32 gigabytes, half of what Meteor Lake U offers. The addition of on-package DRAM is a leg up on AMD if I've ever seen one, assuming Intel can indeed bring this to market this year. There's no indication that Strix Point or Strix Halo coming from AMD later this year, as confirmed by the ROCm code commits recently, will feature on-package memory, so that leaves AMD out of the low-power race currently headed by the Apple M series and Qualcomm's X Elite. Looking closely at the Lunar Lake die shown, it looks like the MX variant leaked a few months ago with 3 tiles, presumably the SoC, the CPU plus GPU, and that smaller tile is either the NPU or it's a dummy die for structural integrity, and these are stacked on top of a base die, all connected with Foveros. Relative to Meteor Lake, Arrow Lake will have less cores, so only 8 in a 4P plus 4E configuration. But the biggest advantage here will be a reduction in power consumption of a massive 40%. So you'll be looking at passively cooled 8-watt parts, for instance, based on Lunar Lake. What would you need that for? Well, Arrow Lake was developed in conjunction with Microsoft, so in addition to it being a desperate attempt by Intel to catch up to Apple and Qualcomm in this sub 30 watts power segment, I think there might be a whole new market that could be interested in this. More on that in an upcoming video. Now, why this system on package could be a win for Intel has to do with data transfer and the associated power costs. I've talked at length about that here on the channel. If we compare this, for instance, with AMD's 3D V-Cache or HBM, we see the following. At the register level, you have a 1 nanosecond latency. At L1 and L2, about 10 nanosecond. At L3 and L4, so that's where AMD's 3D V-Cache sits, basically last level cache, you have 20 nanoseconds of latency. Then at the DRAM level, you'd go up to 30 nanoseconds. So the closer you are to the CPU core, the faster the response time needs to be. But that means lower density. An application that will require a lot of throughput is, of course, AI, because it needs to transfer massive amounts of data. But again, you have a power budget to consider, which is why it's unlikely we will see HBM on consumer devices again, for instance. So Intel's and Apple's decision to create these chips with DRAM on package is a response to the market's data transfer requirements. While AMD's 3D V-Cache is great when it comes to bandwidth and latency, it's not useful when it comes to density and power-sensitive applications. On-package DRAM checks all the boxes in a catch-all memory solution for AI use cases. You get high density, decent performance, and low power. Looking at this package, you can get a good idea of what Intel is prioritizing. It's clear that Lunar Lake is not prioritizing latency-sensitive applications like gaming in the way that a chip with 3D V-Cache would be. So Arrow Lake's biggest win is in the reduction of I/O voltages. To drive data to system memory, you need higher voltages to push that data. But with DRAM this close to compute, and in the future it will be inside compute, you can bring the I/O voltages way down, making this type of package extremely efficient for large data applications. From what's been announced from AMD and looking at their roadmap, I just don't see them being able to compete with Apple, Qualcomm, and now Intel's Lunar Lake at the sub 30 watts segment this year. Finally, taking just a quick look at the DIY segment, at the moment the 7800X3D is the best seller on both Amazon.com and Newegg.com. And on Amazon, the top 5 spots are taken up by AMD, so I think Intel really have their work cut out for them when it comes to recapturing the DIY market. A recent leak from Twitter user Yuki Ans shows an Arrow Lake CPU with 8 P cores plus 16 E cores plus 1 low power core, 8 AI cores, and with 8 threads. So at the top end, we'll get 8 performance cores and 16 efficiency cores, which seems like a good balance to me. It's been suggested that hyperthreading will go away with Arrow Lake. Remember, that's the next big desktop CPU generation. You have Arrow Lake for the desktop and Lunar Lake for low power coming later this year. I know this can all get confusing. So if you remember remember back in the 9th gen Coffee Lake chips, the 9700K didn't have hyperthreading also. It was 8 cores and 8 threads. But here, instead of tasks being scheduled to a secondary thread, which would not be running in parallel, they can be scheduled to an E-core, which can run that task in parallel. It remains to be seen if there will be more than 24 plus 1 cores. With a new process node, I expect power to finally come down at ISO frequencies, so hopefully the 15900K will be easier to keep cool than previous generation's top SKUs. As far as performance gains, it's a bit difficult to estimate as there are several nodes in between the 14900K and the 15900K, and the numbers on these nodes are not too clear to begin with. It's projected that the Intel 20 angstrom node has a 15% performance uplift versus Intel 3, which in turn has an 18% uplift versus Intel 4, and that's on top of the 20% performance increase at ISO power versus Intel 7. So if that's indeed cumulative, as Intel's marketing materials seem to be saying, that means the 15900K could be a whopping 53% faster than the 14900K at ISO power. Sounds too good to be true? Well, that's because it most likely is. Things are never that simple. If you remember the leak from Igor's lab a few months ago, his results for Arrow Lake were way more modest. I could see a 20% improvement, but even that might be optimistic. Probably around 10 to 15% is the more realistic number. But then again, there's a significant node jump here between 14th and 15th gen, at least according to Intel. So maybe we'll all be surprised with an unprecedented 50% uplift. So on the desktop, you're looking at just under $600 for the 15900K in Q4 of this year, with a very optimistic 53% increase and a more conservative 15% increase versus the 14900K. Those are rough approximations based on the node transition. Or $700 for the 9950X from AMD, with an overall improvement of 11% versus last gen. And gaming might even be slower than the 7800X 3D due to the lower last level cache amount. This is assuming prices stay the same as current gen. Even if Intel's node jump doesn't provide a record-breaking uplift, to me this gives AMD the earlier launch as the only advantage versus Intel, assuming Zen 5 comes out by summertime. And if the 3D chips don't come out at the same time, the non-3D chips will probably get hammered in reviews for being slower in gaming than the 7800X 3D. I feel like even in a more conservative estimate, Arrow Lake is looking like the way to go from the early data we have. Knowing that memory isn't scaling, are the 3D variants of Zen 5 enough to compete with Arrow Lake? I'm not so sure about that. Let me know in the comments what you think. As always, thanks for watching, subscribe while you're here, and until the next one.